Welcome! Today we are joined by our Mastering Home Food Preservation team with Purdue University Extension. My name is Jane Horner and I'm joined by my colleague Kieran Ritchie. Today we are going to be making beef vegetable soup. This recipe we are using comes from the So Easy to Preserve 6th edition cookbook. This recipe from the National Center for Home Food Preservation was tested for safety. It is important when you are preserving food to use recipes that have been tested for safety. Today's pressure canner may have a dial gauge for indicating the pressure or a weighted gauge for indicating and regulating the pressure. Today we will be processing our beef vegetable soup with a dial gauge canner. Today we will be canning with low acid vegetables. Low acid vegetables must be pressure canned, as well as low acid fruits and meats. Also, when you have a combination of meats and vegetables, you also have to pressure can. Before you start, check the canner to be sure everything is in working order. Have your dial gauge checked for accuracy annually. You can check with your local Purdue Extension office to have your dial gauge tested for accuracy. To begin, you will need to prepare your jars, flats, and screw bands. Wash them and sanitize them, and then temper the jars with hot tap water until you are ready to put the product inside the jar. For a hot pack, the water will be at a temperature of 180 degrees. Center the canner over the burner. Place 2 to 3 inches of hot water in the canner. To prepare for the vegetable beef soup, you will prepare each vegetable for a hot pack. This is done by boiling for 5 minutes. In a large stock pot, you will be boiling the soup in. In another pan, cook the meat with fat removed. Strain when it's done. Place the cooked meat in the large stock pot with the prepared onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, juice, water, seasonings, which include garlic powder, dried oregano, basil, black pepper. You can add canning salt to taste. Bring this to a boil and boil for 5 minutes. You're now ready to fill your jars. Fill the tempered jars halfway with the solid mixture. Continue filling with hot liquid, leaving a 1-inch headspace. Remove the air bubbles. Wipe the jar rims with a damp cloth. Adjust lids and bands. Only tighten the bands finger tight. Place filled jars on the rack in the canner using a jar lifter. Keep the jars upright as you're putting them in the canner. Tilting the jar could cause food to spill onto the ceiling area of the flat. Put the lid on the canner. Adjust to locked position. Open the vent or make sure the pressure regulator is off. Turn heat to high. When steam starts gushing from the vent, exhaust the steam for 10 minutes. Always vent or exhaust all pressure canners for 10 minutes before closing them to pressurize. The manufacturer instructions for venting canners may differ, but you need to vent for 10 minutes. Close the canner by using the method appropriate for type of canner. For a weighted gauge canner, you will put on a safety weight. For a dial gauge canner, you will put on the pressure regulator. Start timing when the appropriate pressure has been reached. You will process vegetable beef soup for 60 minutes for pints and 75 minutes for quarts. The dial gauge pressure canner processes at 11 pounds pressure. Let the pressure rise quickly to 8 pounds of pressure. Adjust the burner temperature down slightly and let the pressure continue to rise to the correct setting. A burner left on high makes adjustment to correct setting difficult to do. Pressure should not drop below recommended pressure or pounds. If pressure drops, bring the canner back to the correct pressure and start timing over. A fluctuating pressure causes siphoning or movement of liquid out of jars into the canner due to pressure differences and results in excessive liquid loss from the jars. The weighted gauge canner processes at 10 pounds of pressure. Let the canner heat quickly until steam begins to escape from the gauge or the gauge moves and makes noise. Adjust the heat down slightly until the weighted gauge begins to jiggle or rock as the manufacturer describes. Start the time when the weight jiggles appropriately. When the timing period ends, turn off the heat. Remove the canner from the heat if is possible, especially on an electric burner. Do not attempt to cool the canner rapidly. For a dial gauge, wait until the gauge reads 0. While the canner is cooling, it is depressurizing. After the canner is depressurized, remove the pressure regulator from the vent port. Wait 10 minutes, then unfasten the lid and remove it carefully. For a weighted gauge, wait the time recommended by the manufacturer and then tap the weight with a spoon. If there is a hiss of steam, the canner has not yet depressurized. Remove jars from canner using a jar lifter, lifting straight up and over. Set jars on a padded surface with a minimum of 1 inch of space between jars. Do not wipe excess water on top of lids away. Do not disturb for 12 to 24 hours. When cool, check jars to see that the lids have sealed. Lids usually seal with a popping sound while they are cooling. A sealed lid is curved downward and should not move when pressed with a finger. Before storage, remove the bands, wipe off the jars, and label the jar with the date and the name of the product. There is nothing more satisfying than a warm bowl of homemade soup. Many of us are used to opening a can and heating up soup for a quick meal. Every family has their favorite recipes, but are they all able to be home canned safely?